I was standing in my garage holding a box of old company records when I heard my daughter laughing with the neighbor out by the driveway. Dad still thinks he can manage everything himself, Melissa said, but honestly, somebody has to step in before something happens. The neighbor made a soft, sympathetic noise. I stood there for a moment with the file box in my hands while my daughter talked about me like I was already slipping away. Then I slid the box back into the cabinet, locked it, and walked inside without saying a word. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Walter Green. I'm 68 years old. I've lived in the same house for 41 years. Same creaking hardwood floors. Same uneven front porch. Step my wife Carol used to warn people about. Same kitchen window over the sink, where she kept herbs in little clay pots until the year she died. I retired from Green Industrial 4 years ago. At least, that's what most people believed. After retirement, life got smaller in a way I didn't mind. I woke up early, drank coffee on the porch, fixed things around the house, drove my old Ford twice a week to the hardware store, even when I didn't need anything. Melissa started visiting more after that. At first, it felt thoughtful. She brought groceries, reorganized cabinets, scheduled appointments I hadn't asked for. Eric came along most weekends carrying toolboxes and opinions. Eric had opinions about everything. The truck was too old. The stairs were dangerous. The neighborhood was declining. The furnace sounded inefficient. The house was too much property for one person. At first, I let most of it roll past me. People like Eric mistake silence for agreement, sometimes even intelligence. One Sunday evening, they came for dinner. I made roast chicken the way Carol used to. Halfway through the meal, I realized I couldn't find my reading glasses. I checked beside my plate. Then the counter. Melissa smiled softly. "See," she said, "this is exactly why we need to keep a closer eye on you." Eric laughed through a mouthful of potatoes. "One day we're going to get a call that Walter burned the kitchen down trying to make toast." Melissa laughed too. I looked at both of them for a second, not angry, just noticing. Then I found the glasses in my shirt pocket. Nobody apologized. A week later, Melissa insisted on joining me for my doctor appointment. "Just to make sure we remember everything," she said. I told her I'd been remembering appointments longer than she'd been alive. She smiled like I was being cute. At the clinic, the doctor asked me a question about my blood pressure medication. Melissa answered before I could. Then she started discussing my sleep schedule, like I wasn't sitting there. The doctor looked at me less and less as the appointment went on. That was new. Afterward, Melissa squeezed my arm gently in the parking lot. "We're just trying to help, Dad." I nodded. But I noticed she said we, not me. Things changed slowly after that. That's how most control happens. Nobody walks into your life and grabs the steering wheel all at once. They rest their hand on it, little by little, until one day you realize you're sitting in the passenger seat. Melissa started asking questions about my finances. Nothing direct at first. Had I automated my bills? Was I still balancing my own accounts? Did I have someone reviewing things for me? Then one afternoon, she sat at my kitchen table and asked if I would add her name to my accounts in case of emergencies. I said no, politely, calmly. She looked genuinely hurt. "Dad, why are you acting like this is some kind of threat? I'm your daughter." I told her it wasn't about trust. It was about habits. I'd managed my own affairs for over 40 years. I planned to continue. She leaned back in the chair and crossed her arms. "You don't have to do everything alone anymore." What she meant was, you shouldn't. A few days later, Eric started emailing me listings for retirement condos, places with elevators and activity rooms, and cheerful older couples holding wine glasses in advertisements. He called one evening while I was fixing the porch light. "You could make a killing selling that house right now," he said. "Market's hot." I told him I wasn't selling the house. He laughed lightly. "Come on, Walter. What do you need 4 bedrooms for?" I looked through the front window while he talked. Carol's piano still sat against the wall in the living room. Melissa's childhood height marks were still penciled into the pantry doorway. People who build lives inside houses don't talk about square footage the way people shopping for investments do, but Eric did. And increasingly, Melissa did, too. She stopped asking what I wanted. Instead, she started presenting decisions already halfway made. One afternoon, she arrived with labeled storage bins for my garage. The next week, she started reorganizing my paperwork. Then she began speaking privately with my doctors. After appointments, I noticed because one nurse accidentally left the examination room door cracked open while I was putting my jacket back on. Melissa's voice drifted through the hallway. "He gets confused sometimes," she said quietly. "Mostly little things, but we're starting to notice patterns." I stood very still while she spoke. Confused. That word stayed with me. That night, I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time after dinner. Not because I was shocked, because I was measuring how far things had already gone without me stopping them. A month later, I found assisted living brochures in my kitchen drawer underneath the takeout menus. I carried them into the living room, where Melissa was folding laundry. "What are these?" I asked. She barely looked up. "Just options." "For who?" "For you, eventually." Eventually, funny word. People use it when they want a decision to sound gentle instead of immediate. Eric started talking openly about downsizing. Melissa started mentioning how isolated I was living alone. Then came the afternoon everything changed. They thought I was outside trimming branches near the fence. Instead, I'd come back into the garage through the side entrance because I forgot my work gloves. I heard Eric's voice through the partially open kitchen window. "Once the power of attorney paperwork's done, this gets a lot easier." Melissa sounded nervous. "I know. I just don't want him getting upset." Eric lowered his voice. "He'll fight it less if it sounds temporary." I stood there very quietly beside the workbench. Something settled inside me then, not anger, clarity. Up until that moment, I had still been giving Melissa the benefit of the doubt. I thought maybe she was overprotective, influenced, worried. But paperwork changes things. Paperwork means planning, preparation, intent. That evening after they left, I unlocked the file cabinet in the garage. Then I made 3 phone calls. The first was to my attorney, Richard Hale. The second was to my accountant, Denise Walker. The third was to the current CEO of Green Industrial. All 3 answered immediately. 3 weeks later, Melissa invited me to lunch downtown. Eric was already seated when I arrived. There was another man there, too. Gray suit, leather folder, careful smile. Melissa introduced him as an elder care attorney. I sat down slowly. Nobody asked whether I wanted an attorney present. That told me everything. The attorney spoke gently, too gently. He talked about future planning and protective structures. Then he slid papers across the table toward me. Guardianship documents. Melissa folded her hands together. "We're trying to protect you before things get worse." Worse. I looked down at the papers. Temporary guardianship. Financial Oversight Authority, Medical Decision Control. Eric leaned forward. You have to understand, Walter. Resisting this kind of proves the concern. There it was. The moment the mask finally slipped, I looked at my daughter, not the paperwork. Her. And I realized the decision had already been made before I walked into the room. They weren't asking me for help making choices. They were removing my right to make them at all. I reached down beside my chair and picked up my leather briefcase. Melissa looked confused. I opened it and placed a thick folder on the table. Then I slid it toward the attorney. Before we continue, I said, you should probably review that. The room got quiet. The attorney opened the folder. I watched his expression change page by page. First concentration, then confusion, then caution. Melissa glanced at Eric. Eric stopped, leaning back in his chair. Inside the folder were ownership documents for green industrial manufacturing, trust records, asset protections, board agreements, contract summaries, one signed 6 months earlier with the Department of Defense. The company valuation report sat near the back. The attorney looked up at me slowly. You still own this company? 72%, I said. Melissa blinked twice. What? I folded my hands calmly. I stepped away from operations. I never sold my shares. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then I continued. The trust structure also names you as beneficiary to a significant ownership position after my death. Melissa stared at me. Eric looked pale. I slid another sheet forward. This section here, I said quietly, covers hostile competency actions by beneficiaries. The attorney read silently. Then he leaned back in his chair. I looked directly at Melissa. Any attempt to force guardianship against a mentally competent trustee automatically freezes succession access pending formal review. Eric spoke first. Now hold on. No, I said calmly. You hold on. That was the first time either of them had heard steel in my voice. Not loud, not emotional, just final. I opened another section of the folder. These are dated notes documenting every conversation regarding financial control, property liquidation, assisted living discussions, and power of attorney planning conducted without my consent. Melissa's face started changing then, not dramatically, slowly, like someone realizing they had misunderstood the entire room. I looked at her for a long moment before I asked the only question that mattered. When exactly did you decide I was no longer capable of speaking for myself? Nobody answered. The attorney quietly closed the guardianship packet. Eric tried recovering first. We were just trying to help. I nodded once. I know you were. Then I looked directly at him. But you became very interested in helping once you assumed I was weak. Melissa looked down at the table. Tears filled her eyes, but I kept going because she needed to hear it. You stopped treating me like your father months ago, I said. You started treating me like a problem to manage. Dad, you spoke around me, made decisions without me, told doctors I was confused, tried to move me out of my own life, one document at a time. The attorney stood carefully. I think this meeting is over. Yes, I said, it is. Then I turned back to Melissa. Effective immediately, Eric is removed from all succession discussions and future trust oversight. Eric's jaw tightened. You can't be serious. I'm very serious. Melissa looked stunned. I continued calmly. Your inheritance structure is also changing. Delayed distribution, oversight reviews, financial competency requirements. Melissa whispered my name softly, not angry, ashamed. I picked up my briefcase. You were so focused on managing me, I said. You never bothered learning who I actually was. Then I left. The strange thing is, I didn't feel victorious walking out of that restaurant, mostly tired. There's a particular exhaustion that comes from realizing people you love slowly replaced you in their minds before they ever replaced you in reality. Melissa called 3 times that night. I didn't answer. The next morning she came to the house alone. She stood in the kitchen crying quietly while I made coffee. Finally she said, I thought I was helping. I kept stirring my cup. No, I said gently. You thought you were taking over, and that hurt her. I could see it. But truth usually does when it arrives late. Over the next few weeks, things changed. Eric stopped coming around completely. Melissa started showing up alone, quieter, listening more. One Friday morning, I asked her to come with me somewhere. She looked nervous the entire drive. When we pulled into the parking lot at Green Industrial, she stared through the windshield. You still come here? Sometimes. We walked through the front entrance together. The receptionist stood immediately. Morning, Mr. Green. People nodded as we passed. Some stopped to shake my hand. Melissa walked beside me silently, carrying a notebook Denise had given her. We entered the executive conference room, where half a dozen department heads were already waiting. The CEO stood when I walked in. So glad you could make it, Walter. For the next 2 hours, we reviewed contracts, production schedules, labor costs, and expansion projections. I asked questions, made corrections, rejected one proposal entirely. Nobody in that room treated me fragile. Nobody spoke over me. About halfway through the meeting, I looked over at Melissa. She wasn't embarrassed anymore, just stunned, like she was seeing a person she should have known all along. After the meeting ended, we walked quietly through the factory floor. Machines thundered around us. Men and women I'd known for decades waved from workstations. Melissa finally spoke. I didn't know. I nodded. That's true, I said. You didn't. Near the exit security desk sat an old company access badge. Mine. Months earlier, Melissa had gently suggested I turn it in for safety reasons. I picked it up, clipped it back onto my jacket, and looked at her. This company exists because I spent 43 years showing up before sunrise, I said. Don't ever confuse quiet with helpless again. Melissa wiped at her eyes and nodded. We walked outside together into the late afternoon light. The air smelled like machine oil and rain. For the first time in a long while, she walked half a step behind me instead of in front. Some people mistake quietness for weakness because they've never built anything that required patience. I had. And when pressure finally came, what I built held stronger than the people trying to take control of it.